where do you see the most potent threats to Jews coming from today, both in terms of the demonization of Israel and the safety of European Jews?
Paradoxically, the most terrible threat comes from the world of human rights.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Tobin, editor-in-chief of the Jewish News Syndicate, jns.org, and you're listening to Top Story, a weekly podcast where I analyze the most important stories happening in Jewish news around the world. Each week, I will break down politics, foreign policy, and culture to provide insights into what is going on behind the headlines.
Hello, and welcome to Top Story. Thank you for joining us. Today we have a timely and fascinating conversation about Europe, Italy, Israel, and anti-Semitism with author and columnist Fiamma Nirenstein. But before we start, I want to encourage everyone to like this video and podcast, subscribe to JNS, and click on the bell for notifications. Also, we would love to hear from you. Please write to us at editor@jns.org. Let us know where you listen or watch the show and what you think about it. We also want you to be aware that you don't have to wait a full week for more top story analysis. I am now offering a daily top story podcast so that I can share with you more news and analysis about the most significant issues we're facing today. You can find the daily show under Top Story with Jonathan Tobin on the JNS channel on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. And now to today's program. For many Jews, it's impossible to hold a discussion about the challenge of anti-Semitism without pretending that the issue hasn't changed in the last generation. That means that Jew hatred is strictly a subject about which one must focus on threats from the political right. To attempt a conversation in which the fact that it is just as potent and dangerous on the political left, as well as among minority populations like African Americans or among Muslims, is often to embark on a fool's errand. That is true when discussing the situation in the United States, as liberal legacy Jewish organizations like the Anti-Defamation League are a little better than auxiliaries for the Democratic Party and find it difficult to focus on anything but their allies' political opponents on the right, and pay only lip service to the epidemic of black violence against Orthodox Jews in New York, or to think clearly about the links between the intersectional left and the demonization of the Jewish community. But the problem also applies to Europe. There, the assumption is that Jews should look to the supposedly enlightened West and institutions like the World Economic Forum at Davos, which promotes multilateralism and the breaking down of sovereign borders, as allies against the forces threatening Jews. European conservatives are still seen by most Jews through the prism of their historical memories of the 19th and early and mid-20th century, in which the political left was, often wrongly seen, as the defender of Jewish rights, while the right was viewed as accomplices or worse of fascist and Nazi murderers. But just as it is absurd to view conservative Christians in the United States as inherently anti-Semitic, as many on the left do, when they are in fact Israel's greatest friends and favorably disposed to Jews, while liberal mainline denominations immersed in anti-Semitism. The same is true in Europe. That's been apparent in the debate about the conservative Viktor Orban's government in Hungary, as well as that of the recently elected Giorgia Meloni in Italy. In both cases, liberal opinion and the mainstream media have assumed that they are somehow connected to their country's fascist past, despite the fact that they are supporters of Israel and opponents of anti-Semitism. In those cases, as elsewhere, it appears that many Jews, as well as some of the leading groups that claim to represent Jewish interests, are detached from the reality of Europe in 2022 and now 2023. Even more important, it's clear that those forces associated with the left and liberal-leaning opinion in Europe, like the Davos set, the bureaucrats of Brussels, and the human rights apparatus of the United Nations in Geneva, are not only among those doing the most to undermine Jewish rights and to demonize and isolate Israel. Their efforts to break down national sovereignty is empowering those forces that are most dangerous to the survival of Jewish life in Europe. Yet so stuck are we in our mindsets, formed by the experiences of the past, to the extent that Jewish leaders speak of Europe They cling to the myth that it is the left and those forces pushing multilateralism and opposing nationalism that is the savior of the Jews, while those governments, like those of Hungary and Italy, that are resisting the left's catechism of equity, inclusion, and diversity, and standing up for their country's right to oppose unlimited immigration from the Middle East and North Africa, that are most likely to stand with Israel and to have Jewish populations that are not in constant threat of anti-Semitic violence, as is the case in Western Europe. If we're to have a serious discussion about the future of Jews in Europe, as well as efforts to combat the advance of toxic woke anti-Semitism there and in the United States, we're going to need to toss out a lot of our preconceptions about the right and the left and begin dealing with the world as it is today, and not as we imagine it or as it used to be. To discuss this with us today, I'm very pleased to have with us one of the keenest observers of contemporary European politics, as well as an authority on the battle against terrorism and the fight for Israel. Fiamma Nirenstein is a former member of Italy's parliament, as well as the author of several books on the contemporary world and politics. Currently lives in Israel, as well as visiting Italy frequently, and is a senior fellow and director of the program on anti-Semitism in Israel-Europe relations at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, as well as a columnist for JNS. Fiamma Nirenstein, welcome to Top Story.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me here. It's an honor.
Well, Fiamma, we've been wanting to have you on the program for a while, so we're thrilled you were able to take the time to join us. I want to start by asking you, as someone who is as well versed in Italian politics as anyone and understands the history of democracy in that country, what are we to make of Italy's new Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni? During the recent election campaign from which she emerged as Prime Minister, she was attacked by the international press, fascist and anti-Semite, even though there didn't seem to be much proof of that other than past iterations of her party. What can we expect from Giorgia Meloni, and what should we be thinking about?
Okay, so there are many points of view that we can take Giorgia Meloni from. First of all, this young, very alive woman, she is in a certain way fascinating, isn't she? I mean, because she's so young, because she's a woman, because she's a prime minister that is showing a certain ability in keeping together everything, the European Union, the anti-communist, and in the same time, even not to make the left wing too angry at her as it used to be at the beginning of all the story, when they were accusing her of being a post-fascist, a neo-fascist, and whatsoever. Now, I can tell you right away that this part of the story has been overcome, in the sense that nobody tells her anymore that she's a fascist. This is something new, and it should have never been said before, for several reasons. First of all, I don't think she's fascist. I know her personally. We have been in the parliament for 5 years together. So when I founded the group that was dealing with the issue of anti-Semitism, she was the Minister of Youth. So I invited her to relate about the situation of youth and anti-Semitism. And she was perfectly prepared. She came, she explained, and she showed immediately a great sense of devotion for the issue. And that's the way she is. And she's not the first, because if you remember, after his political part, descending from the old fascist party, became prima Alleanza Nazionale, the National Alliance, with Gianfranco Fini. If you remember, Gianfranco Fini, that was the previous president of her party, came to Israel, bent on his knees in Yad Vashem. Do you remember that? And ask forgiveness, and already declared that had been the worst crime that had ever been committed in the history of the world. Giorgia Meloni is on the same line about this issue, and I would say that even preserving some character of her education, that is certainly the one of a girl that was born in a very poor neighborhoods where the neo-fascists were a sort of proletarian youth joining together, contest under populistic attitude, just saying that the politicians are all corrupted, that the past of Italy was not so bad. Then all the side that relates to Israel, to the Jews, has been repeatedly underlined by her, either before she has been a prime minister and after. And I can also say, because I know that this is a part that represent a great side of interest for our public here and the public of JNS, that Italy, for the first time in this last period, has voted twice in the United Nations against those resolutions that all the time declare Israel a sort of a criminal country that has in any case to be brought to the judgment of the criminal court. Italy has voted against, and it's the first time that it does it twice, one time after the other. And it shows that she and her Minister of Foreign Affairs, Tajani, that belongs to the party of Berlusconi, and that, by the way, is a journalist of the same newspaper that I write on in Italy, which shows which kind of a political mindset they have, declares himself very, very proud that Italy is holding on the line that Berlusconi, as a first prime minister in Italy, declared being the line of the Italian government a pro-Israeli line that has not always been followed faithfully, but has changed a lot since the previous time before Berlusconi. But we will go to it. The second point of view that we can look at Meloni from is the surprise that this young woman took the 26% of the votes, while that she put together in such a short period of time, overcoming either Forza Italia that had the 8% and Salvini that had the 9%, Salvini of La Lega. You know, the young leader that declared that he would have brought immediately the Italian embassy to Jerusalem. So it's a pity that he has been lost in this. But at the moment, we must trust that Meloni will be able to follow up on this line. And it looks like she is more careful, has much more prudence than the other one that looks like a 40 years old guy of our time, while Berlusconi is 86 years old, and you know, he really, and she is the one that being what she declares to be. She says, I'm a woman, I'm Italian, I'm a mother. This is what she declared very with her very tough and strong voice, that somebody said is not good nowadays being she become a prime minister. She should change a little bit her hair, her voice, her Roman pronounce, because you can feel very easily that she's not the kind of Italian that has learned in the university or at school to speak in a very sophisticated way. She is really that girl that was born in a very poor family, abandoned by the father, feminist by birth, because she grew with a mother that made every possible sacrifice and grew hair, but she has never studied really. Nowadays, everybody say that she studies a lot, that she endures writing books one after the other, whatever she has to deal with. Her political way, I would say, her economic choice are different from her partner in the government, because her origins are not liberal Democrats. She really believes anybody that belongs to her political and cultural side, in the presence of the state, inside of the state, of the nation. She always says nation, never says state. She uses very much this word, and I think that this is for her a danger, because the other two sides, as you certainly know, Berlusconi has always been a liberal Democrat. Salvini is a liberal Democrat.
By that, sort of a person who believes in the free market and not as...
Exactly. She doesn't really believe so much in the free market. I think what I think is that there are not so many things that she believes in, because the things of the past are certainly not the light that she looks at, and the future is not so clear for her. What is really clear is that she takes in her hand a country in a dire crisis that has lost in the last, that you know that Italy is now 59 million inhabitants. It has lost. It has minus 400,000 children compared to the previous years. It's a lot. Italy doesn't make children. Italy is the country with the lowest birth rate in Europe. People don't have the feeling, the belief of that brings people to make children. This is the truth. COVID has been hitting very hard the country, bringing a lot of death and a lot of misery to the country, also because it's the little bourgeoisie that has always made the history of Italy. Also fascism was made by the little bourgeoisie. Also the Communist Party at the time when it had the 32% of the Italian votes was the little bourgeoisie. It has never been a country of workers or a country. There was the little bourgeoisie, the aristocracy, and the Pope with his court. This is Italy. Italy has no high bourgeoisie, has an aristocracy, and all the aristocracy where you can find people that descends from i Medici or from any other names, Frescobaldi, or any other name that can come to your mind from those times. The high bourgeoisie has never been enough entertaining to become the owner of the country. The little bourgeoisie has made the story of Italy with the presence of the church inflicting its rules, its conservatism at the time, and afterwards its relationship with the Communist Party, because there would have never been in Italy such a strong Communist Party if the church would not have allowed that.
Interesting. Can you place the rise of Meloni's Brothers of Italy party in a context and what its success tells us about Europe or Italy and the effort to push back against the left and those forces seeking to undermine national sovereignty in Europe and elsewhere? How does this fit in with the trends we've been reading about in other countries?
Well, your question has already put it in the right context. I mean, the victory, such a strong victory of Meloni is in itself a sign of crisis of the European Union. Here we are in front of forces, of political forces that either they strongly attack, and this is not the case because she never did it. She's very careful now not to do moves because, Europe at this very moment means for Italy a lot of money. It means thousands of billions that are flowing after COVID to all the European states. So this is the situation. Meloni has to be careful not to make Europe too angry if we want to make the story simple. In the same time, she tries to say that she will oppose, that she says they will see my blood if I will let them impose the rule that they want to impose to let this money flow. But I'm not sure that she would do that. She has already stepped back several times. This is the thing that the big newspapers like Il Corriere della Sera, La Repubblica, my own newspaper, Il Giornale, that belongs to Berlusconi, so he's careful while criticizing the government, but still what they note and what they say that in defining what will be the next budget of the government, what she does is she makes one step on and two steps back. For instance, she declared that she would fine anybody, either a coffee shop or a taxi driver, if they would not let the people pay with the credit cards. Because when you don't pay with the credit cards, you can cheat the state and don't pay taxes. And so she says, I will not forgive it, and there will be a terrible fine for whoever will do it. Well, she has already stepped back from that. There was a revolt that was very strong. Many newspapers wrote, well, if we cancel the black income, then we cancel half of the Italian of the Italian economy, which is true.
Yeah, by that you mean what's off the books, as
exactly.
we would say in the United States.
So she had to step back about it. Something that she did not yet step back, and this gives an important sign of what is happening now. You remember the party that was called 5 Stars? Do you remember that? Well, it was a party that...
I'm afraid most of our viewers in America probably don't, but...
Okay, 5 Stars was a party that was founded by an actor, a populist actor that was really cursing all the political class and took half of the parliament very quickly a few years ago, and has gone as fast as he has gone up, then he has gone down. But how did he go up? He went up paying to the Italian citizens what is called il reddito di cittadinanza, the citizenship wage. Let's call it like this. You are paid to be a citizen not because you work, not because it's not a pension, it's not a subside of poverty. No, it's just that you don't find the work. You can be young, you can be strong. This is not important. You have been offered a workplace that you don't consider fit for your education, or is too far from home, or you don't succeed in going back home to sleep and you have a wife and a child, so you refuse that work. Never mind, you take your 1,200 euro a month from the government, and it is 1,700,000 people that get it. So a lot of people get it, and it's a terrible expense for a government in a situation of need, as the Italian government is. The Italian government is has a debt of 2,771 billions. So that's a situation that she has to deal with.
I want to, if I could,
See,
Fiamma,
no, I finished the sentence.
sort of.
She says,
Oh, sure.
she
Go ahead.
says that she's canceling this kind of subside. And after a while, she said, okay, I will cancel it, yes, but not right away. I will cancel it after 7 months that somebody gets it. And then again, she said, I will cancel it after 3 times that a work will be refused. She said at the beginning, the first time that a young man refuses a work that has been offered to him, then I will cancel. And then now the understanding of the government is that maybe they will go up to 3 times when he will refuse. So you see, she goes ups and downs, and the same she does with the European Union. She says, you will have to pass on my blood to impose the rules, but in the same time, she says, well, if we have to vote to give the money to all the European nations, we will not break with the European nation, and we will vote for the MES. It's called the MES, MES. So, this is it. This is what I wanted to tell you.
Sure. I guess that my question is the lesson as you've described, Meloni and her party and the right in Italy is sort of trying to not be overwhelmed by Europe and by Brussels while still being in great need of aid from other European, of other European countries. But it's just a lesson that applies across Europe when speaking of other conservatives, like for example, Hungary's Viktor Orban, who, though very different from Meloni, also seeks to steer his country on a different path from that of the Brussels bureaucrats, the World Economic Forum in Davos, and nations like France and Germany, who have a very different and sort of overwhelming, sort of liberal agenda on issues like immigration, for example.
Exactly. Now, there was a terrible clash at the very. I will tell you, first of all, I will tell you that in the last year we had 100,000 new immigrants, which is a lot. For Italy, in 1 year, 100,000, it's really a lot, and they were arriving with these ships. Italy is in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, so whenever they just they are brought or they are sold or they are on these terrible boats that kill a lot of people, and it really breaks your heart to see how they take their children on these boats. I always wonder, how can one decide? But looks like their situation in Libya or in Syria are really terrible. So that's the way they try to go. So now what's the situation? The first thing that Meloni did, the very first, is that there were two ships that arrived. She sent them back. And France made Italy a favor and took them to their shores. But what happened afterwards, that Salvini said, I don't know if he did it on purpose, well, you see, when you are strong and when you're tough, then the immigrants do not succeed in arriving to our shores as much as they like. Macron became furious about this. And even when they met, Macron and Meloni, because Macron came and everybody thought, well, now they will make peace. They did not. There is now a clash between France and Italy that resembles the clash that there is all over Europe about this issue. What is the clash about? There is a declaration that was signed long ago together with the Maastricht Agreement that allows everybody to pass every border without passport, that has been regretted and rethought many times, that allows any immigrant allows any immigrants to remain in the country where he arrives. You arrive to Italy, you have the right to stay in Italy if you arrive, okay? This is the European agreements. Now, what Italy says? Italy says, come on, you see that we are a bridge in the middle of the sea. And so we must divide the effort between all the countries of the European Union. The European Union always promises that this will be done, and never does it, so that there is an agreement which is called the Lublin Agreement that stays there and that allows and that doesn't allow Italy to share the weight of this continuous incoming of the immigrants. So I can say that nowadays, because there was this clash with France, Meloni is careful not to go too far in pushing Europe to share the burden. But this is something that will have to be done, because the Italians cannot stand to be the one that that bear the burden alone, and that's a situation.
Yeah. Now, I mean, I think there are a couple of interesting things that you've said in your in what children declining, and yet it's sort of taking in more sort of the population of Italy is being replaced by people from the Middle East and North Africa. What is the impact on anti-Semitism, and how does that impact anti-Semitism in Europe? We're aware of the impact that Muslim immigration had on Jewish life and safety in countries in Western Europe. What's the situation for Italy's Jews, and are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future of Jews in Europe today because of this?
First of all, I'm always pessimistic about the future of Jews out of Israel. I made Aliyah, and I think that this is the right thing to do for Jews. It was so yesterday, it's more and more so today, and it will be more and more so tomorrow. This is what I think. What I can see is this. Jews in Italy are very few. They are 35,000, So on 60 million, on 59 million people, as I told you, because 1 million people less than it was, and it's becoming less and less. The Jews make a lot of children, by the way. I don't know the exact birth rate, but it's more alive and more full of children. By the way, I'm spending 1 year in Italy just to let I have a little child that I want to learn I want him to learn good Italian. So he goes to the Jewish school in Rome. It's a huge, good, alive school where I noticed that the identity of the Jews, while in the past was a mixed identity, either they were religious or they were liberal and secular, or they were socialist or conservative. Now it's becoming more and more religious. The most you are connected to being a Jew, the more you are connected to the religious tradition. This is something that I notice, and I'm not sure that this is always a good thing, because there are people that can do it, people that cannot, the people that are believers, people that are not, and they look for a bridge to their identity. And when the bridge to this identity becomes more and more religion, then not everybody wants to cross that bridge. So I say that this is problematic. Anti-Semitism has been in Italy experimented with the racial laws of Mussolini, with the deportation in Italy, 7,500, I think, Jews have been killed on 30,000 at that time. So, have been deported. So it's a lot, and the Jews have suffered a lot. Italy has been going all along the centuries through the Catholic anti-Semitism that has created the ghettos in the history of humanity. So there is nothing worse than the Italian anti-Semitism, because the creation of the ghettos is Catholic, yes, is the Pope, yes, but it is also Italian. The Ghetto of Venice is the most ancient in Europe, and the Ghetto of Rome is one of the most ancient, and it was opened only in 1860 when Italy sent home the Pope regime to have the Savoia as kings. When the Savoia became king, then they closed the ghetto. Then there are good periods, but then there are bad periods, and then they come suddenly. Mussolini was not an anti-Semite. You see, that's very. He had a Jewish fiancée, Margherita Starfatti. He had a lot of Jewish friends, and suddenly, when he decided to sell his soul to Hitler, he created an artificial anti-Semitism, which became extremely popular. So popular that the Italian side of my family was simply sold to, and part of them were deported by people that were living side by side to this very bourgeois family, and they sold them. They just sold them. These are the Italians. They are not anti-Semite, but they are ready to sell you. And this is something, I know that it's heavy what I'm saying now, but this is what I feel. And I always feel it also about Israel. Italy, mostly since, look, you know that Andreotti was the first one that he was a Democristiano. Yes, in the 80s, that is the 70s and the 80s, that is the time when there is the energetic crisis. And that is the time when they start forming in Italy this kind of government, which is called the centro-sinistra, center-left governments. There have been a series of that. What was the cement that put them together? It was all the time a declaration of sympathy for the Palestinian cause. Andreotti in the 80s was among the first that recognized the PLO, even if the PLO at that time was clearly declaring that it wanted to destroy the state of Israel. And Italy has been a place where plenty of terrorist attacks against the Jews, including the one in November 1982 that has killed a 3-year-old boy and wounded, I think, about 37 people in the synagogue. They were coming out, it was a Shemini Atzeret, they were coming out from the bracha of the Yeladim, of the children, and the Palestinian terrorist group started shooting at them. And there was nobody there to defend them. And this thing was preceded by plenty of titles about Sabra and Shatila and the criminal Sharon. And Arafat came to Italy and was received with a weapon in his hand. I think it has been the only time when somebody that declared himself a leader entered the Italian parliament. He entered the Italian parliament with his weapon. He was received there. He spoke to the parliament with the weapon. And the only one that did not want to be near them were Marco Pannella and Spadolini. You probably don't have to know these names, but I remember them just to quote the fact that when that child, a 3-year-old child, was killed, the Jewish community said, we don't want to see any chief of state, any minister, when we go to the funeral, don't come because we will push you out. We only want Spadolini and Pannella because they were the only two that did not go to the parliament the day when Arafat was there. So the division was sharp. And I can tell you that the big parties, the Communist Party and the Democristiano, the Demo-Christian Party, the Christian Democrats Party, the big parties always found their glue on the pro-Palestinian issue and anti-Israeli issue, while the little parties were more pro-Israeli. Among these little parties, there were coming up the Berlusconi's party too, and even on his side afterwards, even Fini can be put among, and the Radical Party, what is called the Radical Party. So so we cannot speak about traditional declared anti-Semitism, but we have there such a strong and complex kind of left-wing anti-Semitism that when you have every year the 25th of April parade that remembers the day when Italy was liberated by the Allies, always the Jewish Brigade flags. My father was in the Jewish Brigade, so he came to Israel with the Jewish Brigade. So for me, this is very important. The Jewish Brigade flags are always pushed out by a bunch of communist anti-Semites that are always there in their travesty of being third worldist, pro-Palestinian, pro-third world groups. They are actually anti-Semite. This is the Italian anti-Semitism. The Italian anti-Semitism is nowadays much more on the left than on the right. Even if also, of course, on the right, just a few days ago, a member of the party of Meloni, it was discovered by pictures that he had a swastika on his arm. He participated in a party, so he took out his T-shirt, and they discovered that he had a swastika on his arm. There are also people like this. There is a group which is called Casa Pound, and is anti-Semitism on the right. But in the campuses, there is nothing comparable to what is happening in the United States now. What you can find there is BDS groups. Yes, there are some BDS groups, and sometimes they organize something against apartheid Israeli state. Yes, they do, but it's not a mass phenomena as it is in the United States. It's still a minority phenomena, and still also negationism of the of the Holocaust is a very little thing. It's not diffused. No.
That gives us a lot of information there. I want to take a step back now and ask you about your own path to Jewish life, politics, and then Israel. Where did you start out in life politically, and what led you down the path to journalism, politics, and now your present life in Israel?
You're asking how did I...
About you,
About
yes.
me, well, my first step as a very, very young girl was when my parents had sent me in 1967 to the north in a kibbutz, and the war started. And I was there, cut out. I was just in Neot Mordechai, so I was just up over there, and you know, things that happen make you understand many more things. Of course, I was communist. I say of course because everybody in the age of 16, 17 was communist at that time in Italy. This is something that is not common in the United States, but in Italy, it was like that. We had all of these movements that then in 68 and 70, then they become terrorism. But this with the Red Brigades, but it happens much later. At my time, I just went there in this kibbutz because of the communal life. I thought that it was very communist to go to a kibbutz, and I came back completely transformed. Why that? Because when I arrived, I was treated like as a fascist. I immediately found the people that told me that we occupied the Palestinians, that the Palestinian land, that we are the imperialist and capitalist, and that's the way that I started making my head work about the issue. By the way, what I want to tell you is that Israel was very much in my heart. As I told you before, my father came with the Jewish Brigade, met a young Jewish girl in Florence that was a partisan and that would become the first journalist in Italy. My mother, Vanda Lattes, with Oriana Fallaci, they were the first two in Florence. And now there is a very nice garden. When you come to Italy, I will invite you to visit it in Florence. Has been called with the name of my mother and my father, because my father has been the first historian of the Holocaust in Italy. He remained in Italy because he married my mother, but we have been going up and down with Israel to see his two sisters that survived with him the Holocaust, while all the rest of the family was killed. Now, myself, I became a journalist like my mother, a left-wing journalist with a very strong Zionist feeling. It was already there. And I started immediately fighting about that, because the only way you can survive when you are in favor of Israel among the left-wing intellectual side of the map is just fighting and fighting and fighting. And then I started being a worldwide foreign affairs correspondent. I think I visited all the world, and I've been going. I've interviewed whoever you just name it, from Deng Xiaoping to Rajiv Gandhi to I was just traveling around, and then I started coming much more frequently to Israel. I was nominated at a certain point director of the Italian Institute of Culture when this nomination was given to several journalists in several capital towns of the world. But I always kept writing my books and writing my articles. I never stopped one day of writing. It's an illness. You know about that, Jonathan. You can't stop writing. When you write, you just. I always say I write much better than I speak, and especially in English. When I speak Italian, it goes better. But then one day Berlusconi called me. I have never been in politics because I was just writing about the Middle East. I've been writing already 10 or 12 books, I don't know how many. And he asked me if I would have liked to go to the parliament. I asked my husband if he would have liked that, to go to Italy for a while. My parents were there. One of my sisters was there, is there. My other sister is here, but that one is here. Now I'm in Jerusalem now. And so I've gone to the parliament. We have done a huge amount of work, founded the commission of relationship between the Knesset and the Italian parliament, and the commission about anti-Semitism, and examined the situation of Syria and of Iran, and coming back with and before that, in 2001, there is another important episode that happened to me. It was I was writing. It was 2001, and then the so-called ambassador of the PLO in Rome called me and says, "Well, Mrs. Nirenstein, you know that when everybody writes something." And then there is one that sees it with completely different colors. This means that she or he needs a pair of glasses, or that he doesn't understand well what you're talking about. I say, look, I think I see very well and I understand quite well. Put the telephone down. And since that very moment, when I go to Italy, the moment when I go down from the airplane, I have to be accompanied by the police, and this is not pleasant. But I'm telling it here because it's important to know that the only way that they try to convince or to intimidate is with the threats. They threat you, and luckily the Italian state decided to protect me, and I'm protected. When I'm in Italy, I'm protected all the time. Then I finished with the parliament my 5 years, and I made Aliyah. That was the time when Netanyahu asked me to become the ambassador, after a while, the ambassador of Israel to Italy. I could not accept it for familiar reasons, but I think about it very often. I regret it. I loved very much the idea, but I'm very glad that I keep my job, writing and speaking and writing on JNS and on il giornale. One important thing is that they put my name together with very nice names, like the most important is Golda Meir, but it is just, I'm not comparing certainly myself to her, but it's together with her name in the whole of the Nashim Porzot Derech, women that open the way. So I am in the museum, but I don't want to finish there.
No, of course not. Well, you are a trailblazer, but you're not done yet. Coming back to the present in your work for the Jerusalem Center
Yes,
for Public
indeed.
Affairs,
That's the next thing I was going to say. The Jerusalem Center.
You've written extensively about the rising tide of anti-Semitism. While it exists on both the left and the right, where do you see the most potent threats to Jews coming from today, both in terms of the demonization of Israel and the safety of European Jews?
Paradoxically, the most terrible threat comes from the word of human rights. It looks like a paradox, but this is what it is. It's not a matter of chance that the factory of anti-Semitism is the United Nations, the biggest institution that should have been the center of the fight for human rights after the disaster of the Second World War. The opposite has happened, and so all the word of human rights uses the lies that can build. One of them, certainly one of the most important, is the one apartheid, but it comes straight from a series of lies that all describe falsely how the Jews violated the human rights of the Palestinians. And so there is a series of groups from Amnesty International down to any other of these NGOs that have become the basis from where, first of all, the first thing that they do, they deny the right of the people of Israel to having their own homeland, because they always defined Israel and Jerusalem as something that does not belong to the Jewish people historically, culturally. And look at the UNESCO, that they're defining Jerusalem as an Islamic historical heritage of this. This is something so paradoxical. I would have liked Mr. Churchill to answer to them. Churchill that said that Jerusalem certainly will have to go to the Jews that deserve it since for such a long longing for this stuff. It starts from this, and then it starts from this denial, and then it goes straight to the denial of self-defense, which is the other terrible denial. Instead of recognizing that when terrorism attacks you so terribly as it is happening now, in this period, we had 30 dead, 31, I think, people that died of terrorism were killed in the streets last year. And we had more than 1,500 people that were killed during the Second Intifada. Instead of when Hamas attacks us and bombs us in the streets, in the houses, in the city, in the schools, in the offices, instead of asking themselves how must a free democratic people defend itself when it's so badly attacked, what this kind of institution try to do is to stop us from defending ourselves and to make ourselves volunteer victims in name of human rights, and this is always in name of human rights. So my last book, which is called Jewish Lives Matter, it's in English too, and it's just a description of how these people that believes to be good people fighting for the blacks, fighting for women, fighting for LGBTQ, fighting for children, actually they betrayed themselves, betrayed their own ideologies, having become so terribly ideologically anti-Semite, even without putting much attention on it, just flowing with these human rights accusations that becomes human rights lies. And so when when you lie so much about human rights and Israel, then what happens is that you cannot be believed anymore, because you have ignored completely, for instance, what was happening to women in Iran, or what was happening to women in Afghanistan. These groups either never denounced that, or they did it in such a small, incredibly reduced way compared to what they have done against Israel, that it's ridiculous.
Fiamma, building on what you've already just told us about the way that the human rights world attacks Israel, why do you think so many Jews outside of Israel have such a hard time understanding that the attacks on Israel are rooted in anti-Semitism and not reasonable critiques of Israeli policy? Why do they internalize these attacks?
Well, I think this has to go back to the end of the Second World War, and then to the hegemony of the left on the Jewish thought, which has been terribly strong, also because all the leadership of Zionism, the winning part, has been mostly left-wingers. So that's the reason why. I think that Jews ideologically dispossessed of their own hometown Europe were looking for roots in the right had betrayed them completely. Okay, they had been left out, so they had to look for something they could believe in, to make a very complicated story simple. And what they found was just the left. And then there is this terrible confusion between socialism and tikkun olam And I remember there was an American review that is not a matter of chance that its title was Tikkun, and it was a very left-wing review. There is always this confusion. This is one side. The other side of the question is that there is a lot of opportunism in this. You know, there is a lot of being ready to compromise just to be part of the good elite that is ruling the world nowadays. Because, you know, I was looking just today before we met at the history of Italy, and I was saying to myself, well, look, the right has always been around. It's already many, many years that the right is around, but it's always a surprise to see how it takes power, how it can take the power. They go in and out and in and out. And why that? Because the left always stays there with the power of culture. They have the movies, they have the television, they have the press, all the journalists, all the, you know. So what can the Jewish people do when they belong to the bourgeois intellectual side of the world, as many of them do? I am speaking about Europe now. And the United States is different. There is a more popular basis for that. And in fact, there is more people in the United States that are not left-wingers, are there? Among the Jews, I mean. In Europe is different because they don't dare being different. They need to participate at the banquet, to sit at the table of the thinking bourgeoisie. And the thinking bourgeoisie has been, is, and will be on the left side. I don't see changing in that. Look at, I go back for a second to Meloni. Meloni has not there bringing into her government a new kind of people, new intellectuals that have not been part of the past, because, you know, the direction, for instance, of the state television. You know, Berlusconi was different because Berlusconi owned televisions, but Meloni brought only his very close people. There is a wall around Meloni. Meloni is walking in a tank. She has a tank that she's driving, as this tank is made by her own people. And until she will not have the courage or the possibility or the opportunity to break this tank and to think to herself that it's about time to write books and make films and television shows that will be different, also the Jews will stick to the old side of culture. This is what I think. Don't you think so, Jonathan?
Yeah,
that
it's about living in the past, I think is a great way to sum it up. Fiamma, you've given us so much to think about and to learn. We haven't gotten to even half of the things I wanted to get to, as we're running out of time.
Sorry.
But I want to thank you for coming on. I also want to thank our audience. Remember to tune in every day to Top Story Daily Edition. And whether you're listening to us on Spotify or any of the other podcast platforms, or on watching us live on Facebook or Twitter, or on the JNS YouTube channel, or later on JBS TV, please like and or subscribe to Top Story. Click on the bell for notifications and give us good reviews. Please write to us at editor@jns.org and tell us where you listen or watch the show and what you think of it. And remember, keep reading and thinking for yourself, and we'll see you again next week.